Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. A bit of a mea culpa, guys. We didn't have a show last week. I was out at the office. I did film something for you, or I should say recorded something for you, and then I couldn't push it across my janky home Wi-Fi. So I apologize for the absence. I meant to tell you I wouldn't be on. Maybe I can make up for lost time. We have a variety show today. I'm talking about my thoughts on watch auctions, a $70,000 Casio G-Shock, and my half-decade reflections on the Apple Watch. So 5 years later, did it change everything? Find out. Quickly, spare a thought for those who pay for these pixels, thewatchbox.com. Over 3,000 pre-owned and vintage luxury watches active right now, the best place to buy, trade, or sell. And if you do want to sell, we are in a buying mode, paying the highest prices since our founding in 2017. Reach out to me directly for buying, trading, or selling at Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com. All right, viewer wrist shots. I asked, you answered. Hamed T from Tehran rocks a vintage-style Certina, a historic tribute, DSPH 200M, good looking, nice wrist shot, classical perspective. Russell K blows us away with the 2020 Patek Philippe Calatrava 6007A in steel. That dial looks sharp. Ian S shares watches and wheels with the Toyota Mr. 2, the MR2 Generation 3, and his JLC Polaris. Good-looking pair, nicely framed. Tim M, the other Tim M, is enjoying a day at the beach with his Rolex Deep Sea D Blue. Guys, send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com. We've got friends far flung joining in the chat box right here. Burning Mr. B, wrist shot featured. Mr. No Date, Eric Nielsen, PT. We've got Thomas Burnett, Jens K. We've got Marcus G. Marcus, you're in here too. Cull Obsidian, Jean-Claude Beaver, he of the toothy grin. Joe Tyson, the 95th Phantom. K. Kyle, Turkischer Meister. And of course, MCC Le Chinois. We have Dustin Van Patten, John Sai, and we have DT2, I'm going to call him. Watches and Whiskey joining in. Guys, thank you so much. Yes, I'm going to get my hair trimmed. This isn't my style. It's a bit too hippie for me. I need to sober up a little bit, but maybe not quite as much as I used to. A happy medium between now and then. All right, thoughts on auctions in general. We are just about at the tail end of the high auction season, at least for the first half of the year. It will resume in October, November, and December. And I have to remind all of you, this is a public service announcement. Auctions are the reality TV of our hobby. Loud, obnoxious, addicted to attention, but ultimately pretty shallow, driven by money and devoid of heart and soul. So let's reflect briefly on what's transpired just in the last couple of days. By now, many of you will have heard of recent auction results in which Sotheby's set a record for an automatic era Rolex Daytona at roughly $3.27 million for what was effectively a one-off lapis lazuli platinum Daytona with a zenith movement. Okay, cool watch, I'm not going to lie. And remember that Philips, prior to that, sold an early FP Journe chronomètre à résonance for over $1 million. Now I'm going to admit, they're both cool. I like them in isolation. And that Daytona was a very, very handsome watch. No arguments there. I would totally rock that. But you could also get the same look with the 116509 white gold soda light dial for literally a small fraction of the money. And we know that because 2 years ago, Philips sold one for the equivalent of about 58,000 US dollars. You know, it's like you could have had a V8, you could have had that watch, and full bracelet, added value, no strap replacement costs. I'm being facetious, but not very facetious. All of which is to say that auctions, the big cap auctions, not stuff like Watches of Knightsbridge, but Sotheby's, Philips, Christie's, they are just rife with hype. They are bad press for our hobby because the only time we make mainstream headlines as a watch hobby is when someone pays way too much money and essentially commodifies something that someone else could have enjoyed for a lot less money just a few years back. Now here's the thing. There's not a whole lot of competition for piece-unique lapis-dialed platinum Daytonas. That's a unique case, so is that subscription piece FP Journe. But auctions do take a toll. Think about Ferraris in the late 80s. It wasn't necessarily that people buying 250 and 330 GTOs got cleaned out when their investment inevitably shed half its value overnight, because they eventually made it back if they were smart enough to hold on. No, it was the people who paid way too much money for things like Triumphs and MGs and Sunbeams, and paid unreasonable money for mediocre classics in bad condition, and then got absolutely destroyed when those things fell back to pretty much $0 in real worth. All of which is to say, after their maintenance costs, most of those cars actually cost people money just to own. Like, they could have sold them for almost nothing. So the bottom line is that comics in the early 90s did the same thing. And in the late 90s, it was Beanie Babies. Remember when people were paying like $20,000 for Beanie Babies? That's how you vaporize $20,000. Congratulations. And in about 2015, 2014, in our hobby, it was vintage Hoyer. Now, these are the Triumphs, the MGs, the Sunbeams of our age. They're not the Ferraris that will always return to their value given time and patience. These are watches that sold for way too much money 5 years ago and still haven't regained all of their value. There was a brief flurry, a fad, an obsession with these things, and a lot of people who were rank and file collectors who did not have 7 or 8 or 9 figure watch budgets, they were buying things like this and getting hurt. So auctions do have a price, they do take a toll. So all of which is to say, caveat emptor with auctions. For entertainment only, like reality TV, don't use them as a model for everyday life. Now jumping into the box right here, we have Cull Obsidian saying, "Whoa, Tim, vintage MG is lovely." True, but there was a time when the price and the appeal and the economics of owning an MG were out of whack. This also happened to big Heelys in the late 80s. Like, there was a time when people were paying way too much money for cars that were entirely rusted out underneath the Bondo. And all of that was a side effect, downstream ripples from the Ferrari market. So I'm not saying they're not cool cars, just that the prices were completely out of touch with reality, especially given the condition of many of those cars. So thoughts on the right and the wrong luxury watch purchases. So here's the thing. I purchased a Casio G-Shock in 1998. It was a watch that I wore through my boot camp in 2008 and 2009. All of which is to say I got my money for like my 80 bucks. But on my Instagram a few days ago, I posted the first ever G-Shock in 6 years of making videos of watches. Why? Because this was the 35-piece full gold Casio G-Shock Dream Project, a product of the imagination of Mr. eBay himself. It was effectively the most expensive G-Shock ever made, and with a remarkable steamer trunk's worth of accessories, a pretty cool total purchase experience. But there was a mixed reaction here, and I usually get a pretty good response to the watches I post. A lot of people hated it. Now, trying to break down why this was, there was a little bit of watch snobbery because it was a Casio. Not sure I agree with that, but some people had problems with the branding. There were a small sliver of folks who were actually jealous. That is, they really liked it and wished they had it, but they were just kind of burned that they didn't. Okay, I can see that too. Envy, understandable, a human emotion. But then there was the suspicion, and this was an undercurrent in many of the critical posts, that because it's a G-Shock made of solid gold, the price of the thing is so out of sync with the production cost that it is inherently illegitimate. And okay, I can see this and I can understand where you're going, but I'm going to question the underlying assumption. Before I do, let me jump real quick into the chat box. Abdul is saying, "I think that people are buying these watches right now in these auctions because they're either drug dealers or watch dealers, one to launder and the other to pump prices." That happened in the Ferrari market in the late 80s. Yes, there were some drug dealers buying, but there were a lot of dealers selling to dealers, basically musical chairs with cars, everyone hoping that by the time they moved the thing, they would already have gotten paid and the thing would ultimately shed its value in the hands of some poor sap further down the line of custody. Well, that absolutely happened, and unfortunately, sometimes it was the client. Right here, Eric Nielsen saying, "Auctions take cash, no questions asked. The nature of money laundering is the cash holder doesn't care about finishing with the end product." It just jumped out of my hands. Doesn't care about finishing on the short end. That's what he said. Of Sweden is saying, don't forget Dutch tulips. We're not going back to the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, but we may as well. That's a good point. And then right here, Cullub Sitting saying Hodinkee has a lot to answer for in regards to Hoyer. And I'm going to also mention Universal Genève with regards to Hodinkee pumping old watches in bad condition that cost way too much. Although Thomas Burnett is saying vintage Hoyers look great, and I don't dispute that. And right here, bump, bump, bump. Jean-Claude Beaver is saying something Ariel was wearing in our video. I did a video with Ariel Adams. It's on the A Blog to Watch channel. Definitely check that out. And then right here, we've got PT saying get a 4015 for a Rolex Lapis style. Good piece of advice if you like a nice vintage Rolex Cellini. All right, jumping back into our regularly scheduled program. The idea that the Casio G-Shock Dream Project is not worth $70,000 because of the underlying production costs. Here's what a lot of folks are saying. They're saying that because luxury watches like, say, an Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch are mechanical, then inherently they must cost a larger proportion of their end sale price at the point of production. So in other words, yes, you're paying $6,250 for that sapphire sandwich on a leather strap, but presumably it costs a lot more as a percentage of the retail price to make this than it costs to build, say, a $70,000 Casio G-Shock. And there's an immense irony and tone-deaf oblivion inherent in that assumption, because I'm going to tell you right here and right now that it probably costs less than 10 cents on the dollar to make that watch. Meaning when you pay your $6,250, you're buying a watch that probably costs closer to the price of a strap for Omega to make it. Would I be shocked if it cost $300, $400, $500 to make that watch? I would not, and in fact, I expect it. Now, even high luxury brands get in on the act. We're talking JLC, Zenith, even Longa, even Vacheron, Glasuta Original, brands that we all consider to be enthusiast, watch nerd brands, the right brand to buy when you're burned out on Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Audemars Piguet. Again, the fact is, here, even with very special watches involving a great deal of hand craftsmanship, both regulation and finishing, you're probably looking at a production cost of no more than 20% of retail. And in many cases, even from the likes of these brands, the production cost is going to be somewhere between 10% and 15%. So at the end of the day, by this measure, we're talking about a 300-gram Casio, 300-gram Casio made of solid gold. And I have to think that the movement in a watch like this probably weighs all of about 20 grams at the most, which is to say that the basic materials cost of this watch at $1,800 per ounce for gold. Remember, 28 grams to an ounce, 300 grams, about 280 grams of this watch, solid gold. That's probably significantly more as a percentage of the retail than a brand like JLC or Zenith or Geo is spending to make a watch, because you're talking over 20% of retail on materials alone for this G-Shock. Is it handcrafted? Other than the polishing, which is handcrafted? No, of course not. And if you ever need any work done on the movement, they're just going to pop in another movement. But what a bracelet. That'll last forever. And remember, as a cost basis, it probably costs more to buy this as Casio, to buy the parts and make it, than it costs Longa to make like a Saxonia thin. Okay. Hate not, lest you become a parody of a watch snob. Remember, fashion police posing as watch connoisseurs should be cited for impersonating police officers. In other words, love only, do not hate. Viewer wrist shots. Abdul R is traveling to the Netherlands, and he's shot his Casio World Time, a nice honest watch while abroad, nicely composed. Ramon K is on top of Europe near Interlaken in Switzerland with his Rolex Submariner. Tom H. of London celebrates graduation 2020 with a new to him vintage Omega Seamaster. And Dana's V does something I'm shocked more people don't. I wish we could blow that up, but he's putting a Hulk on a really good looking Rolex dress bracelet, and it is absolutely ravishing. So note, this can be done and it looks awesome. The secret's out. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. All right, jumping into the chat box right here, we've got Budik One joining us from Poland. And right here, we've got John John Tsai joining in, saying there are occasionally some bargains at auctions if you are lucky. It's true. That automatic platinum Blancpain handmade display caseback minute repeater, that is going to be the watch that sells or fails to sell at low estimate. Maybe you can work something out with the auction house after the fact, but I have seen that exact watch, a platinum automatic winding minute repeating Blancpain, sell for less than $20,000 at one of these auctions deep in the catalog. So yes, there are bargains to be had, just not on the cover and not at the front end of the auction. And then right here, we've got Robert G. Rolex predictions, please. I would say in the next 18 months, you're going to see a new sub or a new Daytona, but I'm not going to go much beyond that. The Daytona hasn't been fully redesigned since 2000. The sub hasn't been fully redesigned since 2008. It's time. Jumping into the chat one more time. Cull Obsidian saying, I bet that G-Shock is appreciated just being on Tim's wrist. Not my G-Shock. There's nothing left of that watch, and it's covered with sweat from a million different gym sessions. That Casio, I don't know. I gave it a sympathetic treatment, but personally it's not my kind of watch, and I haven't been wearing it around, I promise. The first to own that gold G-Shock will be the first to open the factory ceiling. Bum, 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 and then dig in the long hair, Tim, from Smoko. You know what? A lot of folks are saying they like the long hair. It's kind of replaced the glasses, and I don't really wear the glasses anymore because they'll mat the hair down if I wear them on my head. So they just sit on my desk. It's a travesty, and I miss them. So I'm probably going to shave my head down to somewhere between the old high and tight and this kind of flowing hippie look. All right, Eric Nielsen saying, I had a pre-G-Shock Casio 200-meter stainless case, worked for 31 years until appropriately I gave it a burial at sea. And I will say, we've got Mr. Ninja saying that G-Shock is inherently more useful than an automatic watch. That's true. That watch you just saw has 39 time zones, a perpetual calendar, 4 alarms, it has a countdown timer, it has a backlight, it has a chronograph, it can be dropped out a 3rd-story window, and it's 200 meters water resistant. Take that, Richard Mille. Okay, now jumping into the Apple Watch, half a decade's reflection from a watch enthusiast standpoint. You guys can relate. A few weeks ago, I went on Hodinkee, because I still read Hodinkee, and it announced that they are dealing Apple Watches now. This is a new thing. They are an Apple Watch dealer. And in typical hyperbolic fashion, the blog of record declared the watch that changed everything. Even by their standards, that's a stretch. But did it? This is worth unpacking after a quick look back, albeit not in anger. A play by John Osborne, but not that John Osborne. So Hodinkee invited a flood of memories from my Watch You Want days in 2014, but it also led me to chuckle about how little I've heard about the Apple Watch in luxury circles since then. So let's flash back to 2014. I was just starting at Watch You Want. Yes, a terrible pun. It started as an eBay account. That's why we're Watchbox now. But at the time, I was being pulled in from my work in kind of promotions, because I was mostly a behind-the-scenes guy early on, to help defend the company against the onslaught of the Apple Watch. Every set of investors we brought in, and we were always wining and dining investors at Watch You Want, we had to explain to them our plan for dealing with smartwatches, specifically the recently announced Apple Watch. And I had to write a defense under a pseudonym, it was the owner's name, defending luxury watches against smartwatches. And I remember at the time the original co-designer of the Swatch watch, Jacques Muller, he along with Elmer Mach under the guidance of Ernst Tomke, designed the Swatch watch in the early 1980s. But Jacques Muller said something that shocked me. He said that the Apple Watch was going to do to the luxury watch what the Swatch watch did to the Swiss industry and the Quartz watch did to the Swiss industry prior. And that kind of shocked me because I felt like that was kind of oblivious for a guy who was kind of pivotal at a pivotal time in the watch industry's history. Here's the thing, sure enough, if you look back, 2009 Swiss watch exports were numerically 1/3 lower than in 2015, which was when Apple launched its version 1 Apple Watch. So at face value, hey look, Swiss watch exports, they took a dive, 1/3 less numerically. Maybe the naysayers were right. But here's the thing. Despite that fact, 2019 saw the highest Swiss watch export value since the launch of the Apple Watch in 2015. What gives, well, why didn't the initial hysteria, this is the real question, about the collision of Swiss watch and Apple Watch play out? Well, it did to an extent, because sub 500 Swiss franc Swiss watches have been absolutely decimated, which is to say a lot of the lower end Swiss brands that build quartz watches or very entry-level mechanical watches truly got walloped. And sub-luxury watches, I should also say in their defense, actually held their own. If we look outside of Switzerland, yes, the Swiss got hit at the low end, but brands like Daniel Wellington and MVMT have done pretty well in the last 5 years. And that's mostly a combination of low prices and marketing. So they didn't get hit by the smartwatches. The high-end Swiss stuff didn't get hit by the smartwatches. And in the end, Apple might have heralded a sea change for the low-end watch customer and specifically the customer for consumer electronics. But the world's most famous phone surrogate never became the initially predicted dinosaur killer. It didn't happen, guys. Let's discuss why after a break from my sponsors. You guys, you keep me in business. Viewer wrist shots number 3. Yost B rocks a glorious Zinn 856B tribute with a perfectly matched olive green sweater. Jim T of Adelaide, J-Bo Surf in our chat box, sports a Tudor Pelagos behind the wheel of his Porsche Cayman GT4. I am hugely jealous. Shamal D of Sydney, Australia, stuns with his loom shot of his Laco Paderborn. And Jesse S is working hard with his Rolex Explorer 2 and some power tools. Beefy. All right, now for a look back to hallowed antiquity and the era of the horse and the carriage. For a global equine industry of carriage manufacturers, stable operators, manufacturers of halters, reins, saddles, and of course blacksmiths, the arrival in 1900 of the curved dash Oldsmobile represented the harbinger of doom, because within a decade of the arrival of this Olds, Henry Ford would have copied the mass production model of Ransom Eli Olds. He was the first to build a car on an assembly line. Ford would build millions of cars on an assembly line, and that was the end of the horse as a utilitarian purchase, as well as everything, the entire network of industrial support that supported the horse. This is the same place that the Swiss found themselves in December of 1969 with the arrival of the original Seiko Astron 35 SQ. This was the end of the utilitarian mechanical watch, of the cheap mechanical watch, of buying a mechanical watch because you needed a watch and that meant buying a mechanical watch. No, I will say, as with the Oldsmobile, this one-time $1,250 US Seiko watch did not mark the end of cheap mechanical watches, but the cheap quartz watches that followed absolutely did, and this was the beginning of the mainstream revolution. Now here's the thing, in contrast, luxury mechanical watch in 2014, in 2015, well, that market was a lot like the mechanical, well, let me give you a better analogy. That was a lot like modern day equestrian hobby. So today, we still very much have horses, people who own them, and a small industry that supports the hobby. It's just no longer a primary means of transportation. If you're bringing something to market, like say a shipload of Apple Watches, you're going to do it in trucks. But there is an advantage to that for the modern day horsemanship and equine industry. And that is the fact that although far smaller today, this industry, like the mechanical luxury watch industry, is insulated from technology and obsolescence shocks in a way that it wasn't back in, say, the early days of Henry Ford. Horses and mechanical watches actually live in a bubble, an ecosystem much like, if you will, Australia, where all sorts of things like the platypus simply continue because there is no competition. All of which is to say, if someone were to walk around, a person were to walk around at the Kentucky Derby, asking about the predicted impact of, say, the Tesla Cybertruck on the thoroughbred industry, folks would probably suspect that you'd broken into the post-race bourbon a little bit early. There simply is no conflict between these things. So, that's today's luxury watch industry. And the Apple Watch isn't the modern-day Seiko Astron 35 SQ. It's more of a threat, quite frankly, to cell phones, to other smartwatches, and generally to cheap watches than any product designed to last for, say, 36 months or more. There simply is no conflict between the Apple Watch and the luxury watch. 5 years later, I can say that I know people who have a Patek Philippe on one hand and the Apple Watch on the other hand, and there has never been a thought of exchanging one for the other. And when these things ultimately have to give, that is, you decide to wear just one watch, it's always the luxury watch and not the Apple Watch, because worst comes to worst, you got the phone in your back pocket. So, all of which is to say, there's one argument to be made in favor of the Apple Watch being a truly transformational product, and that's basically the argument that it brought more people into the watch hobby. That 5 years ago, the 20-year-old guy bought an Apple Watch, and now maybe he's buying something like a Longines or a Tag Heuer. Does that hold up? In my experience, it doesn't. A lot of the new arrivals to the watch hobby, people who get into mechanical watches, watches that last years and decades, not months, they often tell me that they got in from Swatch, especially the System 51. A lot of people mention Swiss Army, and frankly, a lot of people mention to me G-Shocks as their point of entry to collector grade watches, to hobby grade watches. So while I wish Hodinkee every success with its new product offering, I can't agree with the premise that the Apple Watch has changed the landscape of the watch hobby as claimed. Are they fun? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, we've got other ways of entertaining ourselves, and I must ask you, are you not entertained? So, let's see what you got from me. I asked, you answered. Your pieces on My Pixels Wrist Shots number 4. Tamer P brings us a watch and dog shot with his Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36 and Fido. JCS knocks it out of the park with a rare ETA Factory Service Technician School Watch. This is the watch they use for casing up 6497s and 6498s. I guess that would be a 98 because it's got sub-seconds at 6. But they also have to teach returning the dial to the movement and adding the hands. So that is the product that they're finished with when they're done with their ETA basic installation training. Super cool. I don't know how you smuggled that contraband, but I want one. Brad C. shares his lovely Doxa Sub 300T Pro on the beach in its natural habitat. And Marcus G. wins the internet today with a Zenith Chronomaster triple calendar moon phase chronometer and a pug in its natural habitat, a couch. Okay, guys. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your watch on this box. Let's take a quick look at what you guys are saying in the chat. Okay, right here. We have Anders asking, are watches really a hobby? Oof, you're in the wrong chat box, my friend. And then right here, we've got Adam Crossfire saying, actually, my Apple Watch got me into watches for all the wrong reasons. I hated it so much I wanted to go old school with cogs and springs just to get away from the messages and pings. Snappy. I like it right here. We've got Abdul saying, my first watch was a Swatch, and then a Casio, and then an Orient, all were quartz. That's how he got into the hobby. And then we have Edward Ledden saying, I got into the watch hobby because I was insane. We can all sort of understand. Don't worry, you're among friends. And then right here, we have Eddie Landsberg saying, didn't Joni Ives say the Apple Watch is great because it gets people to start having something on their wrist again? Again, I don't think so. Based on 5 years of experience, people rarely say I went from an Apple Watch to a hobby watch. It's usually something else, something that is a more traditional watch brand, if not a traditional watch. And then right here we got MJ asking, guys, any recommendations for watches with 24-hour dials? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I would say get yourself an RGM Model 801 aircraft with the 24-hour dial. That's really cool, and it's a sub $10,000 craft level watch from an American manufacturer. I would also say, if you want a 24-hour dial, the vintage JLC Quartermaster is very, very cool. And of course, Meistersinger has no shortage of one-hand watches, including several with 24-hour dials. All highly recommended. I would also say the Breitling Cosmonaut. Many versions, many options. Bump, 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 bump. And then we have Burning Mr. B saying, never understood the concept of a smartwatch. What does it add vis-a-vis a mobile phone? Not much, except one more way to tether yourself to technology. And for me, that's a bug, not a feature. All right, guys, comment. Let me know below. What do you like? Are you fans of the Apple Watch? Remember, they're not at conflict with luxury watches. You can like both. And if you are that guy who got into luxury watches via the Apple Watch, let me know I'm wrong. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks to Sean over there on the switcher tonight, ably handling the maze of images and keeping our imagery amazing. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.